if you were with us yesterday, you heard us talk a little bit about how Lindsay and I were part of Project RAP grant, which was part of Javits. About 6 or 7 years ago, it started, and we worked with finding underrepresented populations at our schools. And that was the goal. So that's how we both started on our journey. Um, Same kind of track, and then we got our gifted and talented endorsement. So we have started that journey because we wanted to find students that weren't getting identified for gifted and talented. Now, there are actual law and regulation about gifted and talent pool. Talent pool is just the group of primary students informally selected as having characteristics of behaviors of high potential learners. And this is found through a series of informal and formal measures. Now, when I say high potential learner, that is those students that actually show gifted characteristics and behavior, and that's usually the top 25% of your population. And the goal with these kids, again, is to find that potential so that we can kind of mold it and help them grow.
And the good thing about primary talent pool is that because it's like an informal selection process, we're not tied to using a specific test score. So that really gives us the ability as educators to be much more inclusive with these underrepresented populations, because we aren't tied to a cutoff score or even using a test at all. So that is one positive, is identifying for primary talent pool helps those underrepresented populations get identified, and that way we can kind of nurture their talent. So the Kentucky Accountability System does have regulations about how certain populations of students are represented in your gifted programs. And so the percentage of students that belong to certain socioeconomic, racial, linguistic groups in your gifted and talented should match or be greater than the total of those student groups in your school population. So if you have a school with 50% Hispanic students, then your gifted and talented program should be made up of around 50% Hispanic students. And that's kind of one of our goals with response lessons, is getting our data to match at the district and school level. So this is JCPS's gifted data for the 2019-20 school year, so the school year we just finished. Now, this is not isolated to primary talent pool, but this does include primary talent pool. So if you will just take a minute and peruse through this data, and if in the chat box, you will just put something that you notice.
So, Lindsay, the first one says, I noticed that economically disadvantaged children are underrepresented.
And that's like in our district that has, as you can see, our total district enrollment of economically disadvantaged students, which is just determined by free and reduced lunch qualification, is a large part of our district. And so we really have to look at that as a district and why those students are being identified.
And then we said
white
students are overrepresented.
Yep. So when we look at this data, we see issues on kind of two sides. We have overrepresentation in our white and Asian categories as a district, and then underrepresentation almost in everything else except for our multiracial students. are pretty even. So we have a lot of work to do to make sure that these students from these underrepresented groups are getting identified, because we do know that gifted students exist in all populations.
Okay, so our three major goals in primary talent pool and with doing response lessons is that we need to have a multi-dimensional approach. We need to be looking at many different pieces of data, and we need to screen all children. We need to find children with advanced academic potential from all background levels, including our diverse cultural, socioeconomic. I know my tongue is like tied this morning. And we need to provide educational setting to nurture their potential. Like that's so key is we're looking for those students that have the potential. There may be kids that really stick out, and then there's some that are like, oh wow, if I were to work with this student, if this student were to get the instruction that they need, they could blossom. So we're looking for those students as well. We want to cast that net very wide, because that would help us in our fourth and fifth grade identifying those students and having students qualify in other areas of giftedness. Now, what are response lessons? Well, response lessons, when we start to get into them, you're going to be like, oh, okay, that's not too hard for me to do. First of all, these are lessons that present information that is new to all students. So we're trying to take away from the fact that they need background knowledge to be able to do well in the lesson, which will take out that bias and levels the playing ground for all students. It's a rich task that allows you to observe gifted behaviors. Now, tomorrow we'll talk about the gifted behavior rating scale, which kind of shows you those gifted behaviors that you can actually look for when you're observing. And it's most effective when you have one adult leading the lesson and one observing, but we know that that's not always possible. I mean, in some of my schools, I've been the one leading the lesson and doing all the observations. So, but that's helpful because then when everybody, both of you know what you're looking for, then once the lesson is done and kids are working, you have two to walk around and be able to talk to the students and communicate with them. And you want to try to do two different response lessons with your class. Some of the response lessons target different skills, different gifted behaviors. So it's good to try to find two that have some of those different um, skills as well. So you're kind of looking for different things.
I did want to say yesterday we had a participant who had great ideas. If you aren't able to have two adults in the room for your lessons, is to video the lesson. That way you could go back and catch things that you missed because you were focused on like leading the lesson. That was a great suggestion. So we're going to start with our second grade response lesson. This one is called Math Curse. And I am going to stop sharing the screen for a moment. If you've clicked on the link that Stephanie shared, you can get to second grade response lessons, or if you are in our slides, if you click this Math Curse, it will pull up the lesson. And every response lesson has one of these that lays out the gifted behaviors that you're looking for, materials, accommodations for ELL learners, and then it's almost like scripted, like with suggestions of questions, and even what does a perceptive student look like in this lesson? What does creativity look like? What does resourcefulness look like? So stop sharing my screen for a minute so I can model this lesson. So you would start by talking to your class about how math is everywhere in our lives. And you would ask them before reading or before getting into the lesson if anyone can give examples of math in their lives. And you're going to take note of those students who can make those connections. You get a lot of the kids that are like, well, I do math when I'm at home doing my homework, or I do math when I take a test. So you're looking for those kids that can go beyond that and and talk about real life examples of using math. So maybe when they go shopping at the store or things like that. And so then you will read this book called Math Curse. Not sure how many of you are familiar with that. I'm going to read a couple of pages as an example, because one of the things we look for in the student work samples is who's able to take kind of the layout of the book, or even kind of how the author writes, and apply it. Basically, this book just goes through this little student's day and all of the math that they do. So it starts with, on Monday in math class, Miss Fibonacci says, you know, you can think of almost everything as a math problem. On Tuesday, I start having problems. I wake up at 7:15. It takes me 10 minutes to get dressed, 15 minutes to eat my breakfast, and 1 minute to brush my teeth. Suddenly, it's a problem. If my bus leaves at 8, will I make it on time? How many minutes in 1 hour? How many teeth in 1 mouth? So it goes through all kinds of like daily things. So in the lesson, after you've read the book, and you can stop throughout and ask students what kind of math she is coming across, you will give them, you can use a blank sheet of paper, or the lesson actually has like a layout where it's laid out with like a place for them to draw and a place for them to write. And their job or task is to create a page for a class math course book. And so you want to encourage them to think about where have they seen a math problem in their life. And so we're going to give you all a chance. You want to do like 4 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes today? Okay. So you tell them you're going to write a page for the book. You can illustrate and write the text for the page. And we really don't guide them very much because we want to see what they can come up with. So we're going to give you all about 4 minutes to create a math problem page for a math course book, and using some example of math in your life. And one thing I do want to note is, like, in the lesson template, they actually have a note that says students can work with partners if they wish. I tend not to, for these, have students work with others, because then it's hard to tell who came up with what ideas and pull out individual gifted behaviors.
Someone said you can also sometimes find the books referenced in the rap lessons on YouTube.
Yeah, a lot of the books we use are pretty common. This one is a little harder to find, like within a school building, but yeah, that's a good idea. We'll give you all about 1 more minute just to wrap up playing with this lesson. And then anyone who's comfortable, we would love to have a couple people share. So someone asked about covering vocabulary in the rap lesson. Yes, and especially like this one isn't as, it's more wide and broad, so you wouldn't necessarily have to cover specific vocabulary, but as you look through some of the response lessons, some of them are very specific to a certain topic. The one Tiffany's going to do is really focused on like sea creatures and conservation and things like that. And so I think if we're trying to even the playing field, I think giving them some contextual background knowledge so that they're able to engage with the lesson, yes. The only thing we just don't want to like model an example of what they're going to do or things like that. That's a good question. If there's anyone that's willing to share, feel free to come off mute and share your math story.
Or if you feel more comfortable, you can always give your example in the text box. It's up to you.
When are you gonna say something?
Hey, Joyce Henderson here.
Hello.
Hey. So, since I've been stuck in the house for so long, the math that's always on my mind is how much food am I cooking? So I did a little math problem with how much food is on the breakfast table.
I love it.
And drew a little picture of bacon and eggs and stuff. So that's my contribution. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing.
Oh,
go ahead.
Sorry, this is Melissa Sharon. Mine's very similar to Joyce's because I just made meatballs and I'm trying to meal prep so I don't go crazy during the week. And so I said, if my husband eats 4 meatballs, I eat 3, and my boys eat 2 each meal, how many meatballs total would I have to make 3 meals? So very similar to that.
And then it says,
Melissa.
Teresa, she wrote a page related to the time it takes to get to school and riding a bus.
Awesome. So I'm going to share my screen again. We're going to look at some actual student examples. So this one, as you can see, there's lots of addition equations all over the page. And then they wrote, do you know that? You know that? I know everything. So when we're the kind of the 3 characteristics we're looking for in this lesson is creativity. So are they thinking outside of the box and coming up with a way to use math that most students of their age or their background would not come up with? You're also looking for resourcefulness. So are they using real life examples from their life, maybe at home or at school, to as examples for their math? So if in the chat box, would you recommend looking at this student further based just on this lesson for gifted behaviors? So would you think that this student showed gifted potential based on their work? So just a simple yes or no in the chat.
Looks like most people are going with no.
Yeah, so this one, probably would not recommend based on this lesson. Now, what we don't want to do is be exclusive, where if they don't do well on one response lesson, then we don't look further, especially if there's other data points that suggest gifted potential. So we use this as an inclusive, to be more inclusive, not to discredit anyone. So a student has to do exceptionally well on all the response lessons you do. This is just another way to include more kids that may not come out on a test or on teacher recommendation. So they didn't really tell any kind of story or connect it to real life. Now, they do showcase their math skills. Now, if the math skills they're showcasing are not, I guess, accelerated for a second grader. If they were up there doing like multiplication division problems, I might look further, because that would be above the level of a typical second grader. So here's another one. So this one says, my LOL has 17 clothes and I had 10 hearts. I threw 3, now I got 7. And up here, she has some equations also. So would you recommend looking further at this one?
So Daniel asks, how does this process relate to looking at local norms? Within a response lesson, you're looking at your class too, to see like what stands out in your class. So if you're looking at your class as a whole and you're thinking, all right, what are the ones that stand out? I think Lindsay can answer this too, but to me, that is like looking at the norms within your class.
Yeah.
So, but you can say more if you want to.
Yeah, so I think usually when we talk about local norms, we're referencing tests, data points, but and you still would want to do that as an inclusive measure, even for primary talent pool, if you're using map data or even classroom assessments, looking at local norms of what's an outlier in your school building or outliers in those specific subgroups. So if you want to compare children that are similar in background, age, culture, language, all of that. But I think you're right. When you do these response lessons, you're doing them with your whole class, and that allows you to see who or which work samples are above and beyond comparatively. So good question. So this one, they do start to tell a story. They are using something from their life, but it's a pretty basic example. They do have some multiplication up here. That it might be one I would flag. It doesn't necessarily stand out greatly to me. It might be one I would definitely want to look at further, because they are showing some accelerated math. Now, they are pretty simple math facts that they could have just memorized from an older sibling. And so this one is one I might set aside, but doesn't scream gifted characteristics. So here's another one. There's a lot going on with this one. I will try and read the bottom for you all. Pizza and kiwi rose, maybe. 2 plus 2 equals 4. 5 plus 5 equals 10. So you don't need to cite people. 1 plus 1 equals 2 people. 2 plus 1 equals 3. I love pizza, and so on and so on. So a lot of no's for this one. do think they're making an attempt to model the book, but you're connecting a math concept to the real world. Again, you do see some a little bit more elevated math up here than some of the other examples. And again, kind of what Daniel brought up with local norms, is that may be really elevated in your class, or it may be typical. And so looking at, again, comparing it to your whole class would be a good one. This one says, how my whole life is like math. And then they have kind of a speech bubble with just a bunch of math facts up here. So we got some addition, some 3-digit addition, and then even some multiplication. So lots of no's I'm seeing. Yeah, because there's no real life example. So this is, and we kind of use these examples to show that, like, now that I'm looking at these 4 examples that came from one class, if I go back to my LOL doll, kind of stands out in this grouping because this one actually connected it to a real life situation and kind of created a word problem. So that's, I think it was really important to kind of bring out those local norms, is that you do want to look at it comparatively to your group as well. And then I'm going to hand it over to Tiffany for our 3rd grade one.
Okay, so for 3rd grade, oh, hold on, there's a question. We'll do that real quick. He says, would it be helpful to have a grade level of teachers rank student work without names of students and teachers listed to deal with bias?
Yes, I would. And honestly, the best way to do response lessons is to make sure that all teachers in the grade level are doing the same ones. So I wouldn't want like one 1st grade teacher to do lots of dots and another 1st grade teacher to do a different response lesson. That way, yeah, so that you can sit out like at a PLC, looking at student work, and having those conversations too as teachers about, I think this one shows giftedness and here's why. And I like the not having names or having kids put names on the back so that you can look at it without preconceived notions in your head of, oh, well, they do really well on math testing. So that kind of tends to make you think, oh, like this is a better work sample because I already know that they're potential gifted. So that's a good point to make.
And Teresa said she had the students write their names on the back.
Yeah.
I guess like from our point of view, like our perspective, like when we go into the classrooms at our schools at the beginning of the year, we don't really know the kids that well. So like sometimes it's good having that outsider come in and do the lesson and like go around and listen to kids, because I don't have any notion of what the kid can do when I come in at that point. So that's kind of the benefit of having someone outside of your class come in and be an eye too, because they don't know your students. So
yeah.
So I'm gonna do the 3rd grade lesson, Saving Sea Creatures. This is we found these. Well, we've got these lessons from a different program than WKU. They're from U-Spark, because WKU only does K through 2. So this is a 3rd grade lesson called Saving Sea Creatures. In the link in the chat box, the 3rd grade lesson is linked if you want to go and look at it while I'm talking. I know that Lindsay's probably going to stop this so I can kind of show you some things and talk to you about the lesson in general. But to start out with, this is the book that's recommended, Dive. It's just a non-fictional text. Honestly, it's not really that like special of a text. I just use like the first couple pages as like a visualization. So the first thing you do is this lesson is looking for creative, perceptive, and curious students. So those are the characteristics that it is identifying. Like all of the lessons, just like the WKU lessons, it still tells you like um, ELL ideas and tells you the materials you need and all of those things. So I start with asking a couple questions. What are some dangers that we have to protect ourselves from? And what are some dangers that animals have to protect themselves from? So the kids start thinking about all the things in the world that we have to kind of shield or protect ourselves in the world. So you start listening for those prospective kids, like those kids that can think about those original ideas that can solve environmental problems. So, for example, maybe a kid says that people need shelter from disasters and things like that. So you're listening for those kids that can tell you those things. Um, that's the first part, the discussion. Then you get into, you say, people have a negative effect on ecosystems. So kids are starting to think now, okay, what do people do that can affect the ecosystem? And so then my next step is I read them just like the first couple of pages. Now what I do is I tell them to close their eyes, and it's like a visualization thing. So you don't have to do that, but that's what I do for them. All right, chapter 1, down to the bottom. Would you like to visit the bottom of the sea? It's easy. Just climb aboard a little submarine. Take your seat and let's go. The submarine dives down below the surface. At first, the water is bright blue. It sparkles in the sunlight. There are many fish. As the submarine drops deeper and deeper, the water gets very dark. The sun's rays don't reach this far. Fewer fish swim here. Finally, the submarine is 1 mile under the sea. The water is darker than the darkest night. Bump! The submarine lands on the ocean bottom and shines a bright light. The sea floor is muddy. It's covered with fish bones and broken shells. The water, if you could feel it, is freezing cold. Now, I stop there and I tell them to think about when you're down there, what kind of things do you see? What dangers do the animals, the fish under the water experience? And then what their job is to create a new invention that could help some animal under the ocean or in the ocean. So what I want you to do is on your scratch paper, I want you to design some invention. So think about a problem and then an invention that could solve that problem. And then we'll probably give you, what do you think, 4 minutes again?
Yeah.
5 minutes? All right, we'll give you another 4 minutes. So you're going to draw an invention that could solve a problem under the ocean, and then I'll see if anybody wants to share out. will take like one more minute. Okay, would anybody like to share either their drawing or an idea you have? And you can either come off mute or you can put it in the chat box, either one.
Okay, my name's Elizabeth Iredale, and I'd be glad to share. I'm at Whitney Young, and we had a group of kids last year do stuff about saving the world from plastic pollution. So can you all see my drawing?
Let's see, push it up just a little bit further, maybe. There we go.
Yeah, just a couple people on a boat, and there's all this plastic pollution at the bottom of the ocean, and they've invented like a little gripper, a little hand gripper to get down there and get that plastic pollution.
Nice,
So,
thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, I love the one in the comments. Sarah said that she came up with a woven seaweed blanket to help shield the sea creatures from the cold current.
Oh. So, just like you all were coming up with, oh, someone said a huge vacuum for plastic to keep the sea creatures from getting entangled in it. So just like you all were thinking about those problems that the sea creatures face, and then the inventions that you could come up with to solve those problems, these are critical thinking skills within these lessons that the students are doing to try to figure this out. And so when we show the examples, some of the things you can give them just blank paper, or you could give them this paper that's within the unit. It just tells them to draw a new way to save sea creatures, and it tells them to label and try to have come up with original ideas. So it's just a few reminders for them. So what I want you to do is I want you to look at these examples, and remember, this is just a first glance, and then we can think about the group as a whole because they all came from the same class. About thinking, did any stick out from the group? So would you, yes or no, look at the student further for gifted characteristics from this lesson? And you could just put yes or no in the chat box. All right, I see some yeses. All right, I'm not going to tell you if we think yes or no yet until we do all of them, because you might change your mind once we go through them. All right, can we see the second one, Lindsay? All right, so here's another one. This is the trash orca. If you can't read some of this, it says that it's a fake powered orca that collects trash, and when it swims back to shore, or when it's full, it swims back to shore. It'll have bigger eyes than a normal orca, and the eyes will flash if it detects trash, and it will have a program if it detects a human, and it'll say, "I'm just collecting trash." And all the little details, the labels have the little the speaking area where you would speak into it, and then it labels a tube and where the trash is collected, and all those things. So it has all those labels around it. Okay, I see a lot of yeses. Definitely yes for creativity. Okay, and then here's the next one. He or she has labeled it with actual steps. So it has a net that scoops up the trash, and then it has a computer that converts solid waste into electrical energy. It has a place for the battery holder, an alarm system that alerts the company when it becomes full, it looks like. It even has like down at the bottom, it has where the vacuum is. So it has lots of labels. Would you, yes or no, recommend this student or look at them further for other pieces of data? All right, I see a lot of yeses. Okay, and then here is the fourth one. So basically, this is like a trash conveyor belt, and it would collect the trash, it looks like, and bring it up the conveyor belt. So I see a couple yeses. Some no's. Now, my next question is, after looking at all 4 of these examples, if I told you that 2 of them we would look further at and 2 of them we would not, is there any, would you change your mind on any of them, looking at them as a whole, like from the same class? So I see someone said that 2 and 3 would qualify or look for further. Someone said they changed their mind on number 1. Changed their first answer to no.
I will say that this lesson really brings out the best in a lot of kids. They're really engaged in this one. And so this one I feel like is really important to do comparatively and have those conversations while you're doing it, because, or observing. I'm going to go back to this one, which alone, just reading through his description, is definitely has gifted characteristics. But even more so when I watched him do it, he was over here where he talks about the converter of solid waste into electrical energy. He was over there on his computer, like researching like what he was going to do, like how can I get rid of this waste in a better way than just putting it in trash. So like that tells me he's definitely got some gifted potential. And the other thing is, this is a 3rd grade lesson, so we have to do that comparatively to their age as well. And so I guess for the first one, because these are all kids that I did it with, good idea. Like they've identified the problem of oil spills, but not as, they haven't gone through like, oh, how, like, can I actually just turn oil into water? Or am I just coming up with something random versus my friend over here who's like got the research down and is over there figuring out like exactly what's possible scientifically. So.
And like Lindsay said, like the conversation is so important, because when I was doing this lesson with a group of 50 3rd graders, like there was one student that, like, if you just looked at his drawing, you wouldn't really be able to figure out what he was talking about. But like he had done all this research on like what repels sharks and all these chemicals and like natural scents that repel sharks, and he had created the shark repellent, and he was listing off the top of his head all of the ingredients inside of it and things like that. So that's so important, and that's why I use that little over that conversation piece to kind of make sure that, you know, we know what's going on in their brain too. And then our last few things, we have the links to the WKU response lessons. Then there's another link to K3 response lessons. That one I believe goes to our Google Drive. And then we have the RAP article, which was about the work that we did during the Javits grant. And then our final slide is just our Twitter links. Remember, if there's anything you want to tweet out today, you could use the hashtag #GiftedJCPS.